the pride has been kind of getting in the way of health in the last few years. And so we really have, through therapy, relationships, mentor relationships, that sort of thing, really try to work through why do I need to work so much? Why do I need to put so many hours in? And what else could kind of take the place of that?
So what software do you use for your podcast?
We don't have a video component, so
Okay.
we're just doing the audio. We just use GarageBand, and we invested in higher quality audio equipment.
Well, I don't watch podcasts. I might see a clip here or there that somebody put a clip out.
Right.
Statistically, most people don't watch ours either, but sometimes people like to see the face on the other side of the voice, like yours.
Well, they are in for a treat today. Look at these two ugly bugs.
Speak for yourself. I guess I resemble that.
I included myself.
I resemble that comment. Well, I just jumped into that you, first of all, we've been friends a long time. You've got a podcast, but I have not mentioned your name yet, Wes Trevor. And I was telling Kelton about your podcast, and I really kind of boiled it down to, youth pastors and beer, and which is not fair. It's so much
It's pretty
more
close.
Yeah, but it's so much more than that. So, like we don't do a script and any of that stuff on here, but why don't you at least pretend that I don't know you, or the people listening don't know you, and say, hey, who am I? What do I do? Why am I here?
Yeah, it's interesting question. A lot of that's changing in this season. So currently, I'm over all of the children, youth, and young adult stuff at my church. I'm at a church in Denver. Been here for about 3 years, and that's my main gig. And then I've had a lot of side gigs going for quite a few years. So co-host on the Youth Ministry on Tap podcast. We just wrapped that after 4 seasons. Decided to not pick it up for a 5th. Just felt like we had kind of finished what we were doing. And I'm also the executive director for an organization called the Denver Youth Worker Collective, and we engage and care for youth workers beyond the walls of the church. So we're the person you call when you're in crisis and desire to have someone who gets what you're doing but isn't actually a part of your congregation. And I just announced to my board that I'm stepping down from that in June to be able to focus on what I'm doing at the church. And the primary role that I have is as a husband and a dad, and I've got 2 kids at home, and I want to spend more time with them instead of people that certainly mattered and are important in our city, but I wanted to spend more time with my kids. So
that's the right answer.
Yeah.
And I know you, man. It's not a fictitious answer. We all have that spiritual answer, like, well, first of all, I'm a husband and a father.
Right.
I say
this is after 2 decades of totally having the wrong idea about all that. And 13 years of marriage and 8 years of being a dad and getting it wrong a lot of the time and having my priorities out of whack. And
let's talk about that.
Bring them back in.
No, let's talk about that. 2 decades of getting that wrong. What's that mean?
Yeah, I think I embodied a lot of what was modeled and taught to me as a kid who grew up in the church. I'm a 2nd-generation ministry leader, pastor, and my parents did their best to model it to us. And there are times they got it right, times they got it wrong. I have just bred into my DNA a work ethic that's unhealthy. So I like to work hard. I like to work long hours. And I took a lot of pride in that for quite a few years. And the pride has been kind of getting in the way of health in the last few years. And so we really have, through therapy, relationships, mentor relationships, that sort of thing, really try to work through why do I need to work so much? Why do I need to put so many hours in? And what else could kind of take the place of that? Is there something that champions or maybe kind of rules that out? And this is probably the biggest shift for me in a professional career of 18 years, where I have really tried to reprioritize and create space, so I wasn't just running all the time.
Well, let's go back to the question of why. What are you discovering as your why? I mean, I get it. Okay, so
Yeah.
I'm a PK,
Mm-hmm.
and I seldom saw my dad. As a matter of fact, I think I'm dealing with. I'll say this because my dad doesn't listen to this podcast, or any podcast, by the way. Um, Daddy wounds kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and never, deliberate, right? I don't think any of us deliberately damage our kids, but inadvertent for sure. And all I learned that, you're a slave. You're a slave for the Lord. And
Yeah.
it's a badge of honor. And so my wife and my sons should understand, the responsibility and the call on my life, which to forsake all other things, including my household, for the gospel, which I think I'm still battling, but that's garbage. It's not even
Yeah.
biblical.
Yeah.
And yet somehow we've made it into the ethos of what it means to part of what it means to be a pastor.
Yeah, so to answer your question why, I think there's two big shifts for me. One was I've been a youth pastor for so long that I didn't know what to do with young kids at home.
Mm.
They weren't my favorite. It's not my favorite life stage, dealing with diapers and learning to walk and all that kind of stuff. I just find my kids interesting at this point. And so I want to spend more time with them, where I was probably repelled earlier, and it was more of a duty and less of a desire.
Interesting.
But my kids are getting to a place where they're rad. I mean, they're super fun to hang out with. And I realized just how big the role was in what I was shaping in kind of their worldview and
Yeah.
basic skills and all that kind of stuff. And I can't do that when I'm absent. So I would say that's one big piece that's shifted for me. And
Okay.
then I would say the second, and then we can dig into both of those, was COVID. COVID was actually a huge gift for me because it forced the brakes. And that 6-month season of being forced to be at home, I had to reevaluate everything.
It's
And
funny. It's funny because a lot of us would say COVID was a blessing in disguise.
mhm.
But we've went back to our bad habits, most of us. Maybe that's just an anecdotal statement that I want to believe, but I really think in general, the church had an opportunity, pastors had an opportunity, leaders had an opportunity to reprioritize, and how good it felt. So, like, my story is this. I mean, I went from flying 150 days a year to almost zero, unless it was an obligation or maybe a family event. But, my wife, Cindy, calls herself a single married mother for most of her life. And I think when my sons turned about, and there's 3 years between them, so I'm going to guess 18 to 21, somewhere in there, which is pre-COVID. I asked him, like, do you resent? Because I think there's part of me that resents um, being a ministry leader's kid. And yet I'm doing it, and then I followed suit. I asked them if they resented it. Now, we had a different kind of perspective where we wanted to make the world their backyard
Mm-hmm.
instead of their backyard their world. And we had the freedom to do that just because my role in ministry is different, even though I still serve a local church. I've still always done global and national stuff. And at least for me, they said, "But Dad, how would we have ever got to see like everything we've experienced all over the planet if it wouldn't have been there? Um, if it weren't for the strength of my amazing partner, they probably would resent it. And I think that's probably true for you too. But you didn't keep it up throughout their developmental years like I did, from like 0 to 20. So you're making a change appropriately in a much better season of their life.
I mean, I'm attempting to. We can talk about success. Did I do it or not in the next 2 decades? But
Mm-hmm.
I I have also a very fierce partner. It's full court press for both of us, both directions, and so there's a lot of conflict around my schedule, and a lot of it's healthy and necessary, and it's the right impetus for me to reevaluate. And at the core of the busyness was asking the question, why do you need to be so busy? Like, why
Mm-hmm.
do you need to have a schedule that requires this of you? And for me, I was filling I was trying to fill a tank that's unfillable, which is I need to find my worth in my performance.
Yeah.
And I need to find acceptance by who I'm associated with and being able to compare with them so I can hang.
Yeah.
So, knowing your story, knowing some of the people we know, it's like, oh, I need to be gone X amount of time, or I need to put hours in to try to match and hang
Yeah.
with that crowd. And I'm grateful that all of that felt very fleeting once it was all shut down. And I had to do some pretty deep spiritual work that then led to the work with therapists and so on and so forth to try to evaluate that why question. Why do you have to try to keep up? Why do you have to find your worth? And I don't think that's something that's going to go away forever. I think that that's going to be seasonal. Do I feel that, or do I desire to try to fulfill that? But I'm grateful that now I have a place of recognition to be able to say, oh yeah, that really was why I was trying to pursue all this stuff and do all of these things.
I read
And
an interesting. Sorry, I want you to finish
no,
that
go
thought.
ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I read an interesting. I'm in the midst of an interesting book, and in the midst of it, in the midst of this chapter today, the author threw in something about the Enneagram. Now, I've taken Enneagram tests. I've read 4 or 5 books on the Enneagram. I'm not smart enough to figure out the Enneagram. You sit down with people who are Enneagram, addicts, and they'll tell you what number you are, and they measure
Yeah.
you and judge you and dissect you,
Yeah.
and I'm like,
Which is funny because in the Enneagram world, you're not necessarily supposed to do that, but
well, once again, maybe we value our worth by knowing more than the other person.
sure. Yeah.
And anyway, I'm looking at it right now. I just opened my iPad as you're talking, and because I had stayed on this page, and I guess I'm probably what they call a 3, right?
Mm-hmm.
I've taken it 2 or 3 times. Sometimes I'm a 3/4 or 3-wing 97 or some stupid thing. The achiever, and so as we're talking about authenticity and the authentic pastor in this project we're in, I talk a lot about the idea of true self and false self, which not all pastors or people in Christendom in general like that
Mm-hmm.
terminology.
Mm-hmm.
So since we don't embrace it, we don't really quite understand it.
Mm-hmm.
But the type 3, the achiever, addiction to the false self, defined as vanity leading to deceit. I read that this morning. I thought, crap, that's the best I've ever read about why I'm an idiot right there. Vanity leading to deceit, when the true self expression is divine hope, faithfulness, and creativity. I don't want to get into that. I'm still stuck on the vanity leading to deceit, because when you think about, you alluded to it, the people we know, the people we run with, um, they've written something, they speak, they travel, they're gone, they're recognized, they have notoriety, and you just want to be able to hang with them. And for me, I know this to be 100% true. It's my lack of self-confidence, my lack of self-worth, something I've carried for a very long time. And so I fill my life with activity in order to find this false sense of achievement,
Mm-hmm.
only to be really kind of constantly disappointed um, in myself. I'm
Mm.
striving for something that, number one, I don't know that I can reach. Number two, for sure, I don't need to reach. And then always looking back and going, man. So it kind of creates this self inflicted disillusion in
Yeah.
me,
Yep.
and feeling the need then that people then go, oh, you're gone so much. You must be doing amazing work. Well, actually, no, I'm just occupying a seat on Delta. And so, I mean, I've given that up. I do miss it.
Yeah.
This is going to sound really bad, but I kind of miss the travel more than I miss the people. I miss the
Mm.
travel more than I miss the stage or the the golf clap applause, if I got
Yeah.
any, and or whatever. And then there's days I think, oh, I need to write a book. I need to write another book. I need to see if I can get myself booked on some kind of speaking thing or event or circuit or something again. And lately I've been thinking, why is that? I mean, it's not because you really crave that. I don't really want, I mean, my sons are gone and, you know, have lives and partners of their own. And, um, and I don't really want to be away from Cindy a third of the year anymore. So why is that? Why do I want to slip back into that false sense of security when I know that it's not fulfilling?
Well, and I understand. I'm on board with the Enneagram direction and can translate my circumstance through that lens. What I understand to be the shadow side of the three is the people pleasing aspect.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, and so that temptation is probably always going to be there because the desire to people please is connected to the achieving. So the achievement is kind of the strength and gives you the why behind your what, but very quickly it tips over into that shadow side where it's I just want to please people. So that golf clap is probably more powerful than we necessarily think, even though it's nameless and faceless most of the time, because it's starting to stroke that kind of ego. For me, I very consistently throughout the years have tested as an 8 on the Enneagram, 7 wing, known as the challenger. I think anyone who meets me would say that beyond a shadow of a doubt that's true, which is a very 8 thing to say. I think for me, the two big things, kind of a shadow side piece is lust is kind of the primary shadow side of the 8, because the other side that's power, those are things that can be really intertwined with one another. And so, what am I lusting after? I'm lusting after notoriety. I'm lusting after, if there's kind of money attached to these kinds of projects, that sort of thing, the desire to have money so that I can do the things that I want to do, so on and so forth.
yeah,
But more than anything, I think it's connected to what is the greatest need of the 8. And I really like what Ian Cron has to say about this. It's the idea that I need to be in control or trust the person who's in control of me. And so if I maximize my time and I'm gone all the time and I'm kind of in the driver's seat of all that kind of stuff, guess who I trust? I trust me.
yeah. You trust you.
And what happens when you stop trusting yourself?
Yeah,
That's where I think things started to get kind of dangerous. So not dangerous in like I was concerned about my mental health sort of a way, but dangerous in that I was on the verge of kind of getting lost in the sea of performance. And I can just keep saying yes and yes and yes and never say no. And then before I know it, I'm doing the other thing that I can't stand doing, which is letting people down. Because I've said yes to too much, I can't actually fulfill everything I've said yes to, not with any kind of quality. And so the primary places that I needed to serve, my family and my church, they were getting scraps from me. And so I needed to go to work and try to figure out why that adjustment was needed.
yeah. As you were talking, I was thinking about the word identity, and I think that's where I got most of my identity. So I'm 53 years old, and I was actually laying in bed last night. I'm not making this up, half the stuff I say, I just make up. But I was actually laying in bed last night, and I was questioning some theology that I feel like I should believe, but I don't. And then I'm having this conversation about, shoot, if I don't believe that, then this, and then what, and then the whole thing. I have the same conversation about myself, like what I believe about me now. And you feel like it, you get to a certain age, like I should have this stuff figured out about me. But I don't, because I think I'm finally learning to be honest with myself. And that's a very uncomfortable place to be. I think I prefer the lie,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm not sure that innately, we all don't prefer the lie. Kind of comes with our birthmark, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And we've always, since the beginning, preferred the lie. And I can tell myself all kinds of lies, and how important I am, why I need to be so busy, all of the above, and leave myself really empty.
Mm-hmm.
That's me. I do that. I do that to myself. To the point for my own peril. Well, I don't take time for me. I mean, there's a difference in feeling really good about who you are. There's another thing about, even though it's fake, and then another thing about taking time for you and learning to love you.
Mm-hmm.
Because until you do, how do I possibly pass that on first to my family and my wife and my kids, and then eventually trickle down to my congregation?
Yeah. I think I'm less in the all truth and all lies, and more I'm really good about being honest about the stuff I like to be honest about.
And that's a good
And
way
then
to
I
say it.
don't even touch the stuff that
Mm-hmm.
I know I'm lying to myself, but I don't want to stare it in the face. I don't want to look at it. And that's, to me, for my personality type and my stage of life at 36, that's where the work is, I think, is how do we stare at the stuff that you don't want to stare at?
See,
And how do we try to bring honesty into those places?
I always laugh at that when I realize that you're only 36, right? And I don't say this to puff you up, right? Um, but ever since we started spending time together a decade ago, even at 26, I would have said you were 26. And we didn't always get a chance to really engage in the times that, how's that for a pun? Engage in our little engaging conversations event that we have. Yeah, came out, didn't even plan on it. But the more that we have, which is still not enough, the more I look back and go, dang. It's like even in this conversation, dang, Wes is a intelligent. And I don't, like, again, I don't say that to make you feel intelligent, but you are. And I learn, I think I might have told you that last year. Maybe I didn't. I should have. That in our conversations, I learn from you. I grow from you. And then I feel bad because I feel like I should be the one to know it all, but I don't, So that's the cycle that I play in my head.
I, Tim, I think some of the stuff we talk about is so potent that I'm not sure that we can talk about it frequently. It's the sort of stuff that we have to kind of touch once or twice a year. And then the touch points of relationship really are, checking into each other after Michigan games to make sure
That's
that our
right.
Wolverines
Go blue.
have done
Go
the right
blue.
thing. Go blue. Hail to those victors.
Right now, Kelton, who's sitting out the other end of this call producing, is yelling, "Go green, go white." He's hating us right now.
Well, he can hate away because it's reciprocated. Not as long as we all hate the Buckeyes together, we can get on board with that. So,
Amen.
but in any case, Tim, especially the last couple of years, we've been hitting depth nerve type stuff.
Yeah.
I remember our conversation a couple of years ago where you were really pushing on prayer, because you're in a season where you're saying, I don't even know if God is real, so why should I even pray to a God that's real and it's all fake and in my head? And I said, I just don't think that you've really experienced some of the stuff I've experienced in prayer. and it's different than the narrative that you're sharing right now.
Yeah, no, I remember that conversation poignantly, as you were talking about and gave me some things to wrestle with that really challenged my thinking.
But that's not like a daily conversation. You and
No,
I
you can't
can't
do
just
that. You
come
can't do
back
that.
to that every day,
No, we have
you
to talk
know?
about trout fishing,
Yeah,
right? We got to
please.
talk about important things. So, like, matter of fact, right now it's steelhead season.
Mm-hmm. I
You
don't
guys have
live
a.
in a state that has
I was going to
a
say you don't have a
steelhead run.
you don't have a steelhead run, and I saw pictures the other day of some beautiful steelhead being caught, and I've got
Mm,
this. We talked about this earlier. I've got this shoulder issue right now, and I'm really pissed because like it's getting to be golf season. I love to golf. I was just in Utah with my oldest son. And I could not ski, and now it is the peak of the steelhead run, and there's no way I can do this.
right.
You can't land a steelhead with one shoulder.
No.
You can't. Well, you could, but it wouldn't be worth. That's not a steelhead you
Yeah.
want to tell people about, right? It's a
No.
baby steelhead.
I mean, I was at the doctor this morning because I have injured my knee, and the first question, will I be ready to go for elk season in September?
That's
So
right, man.
I'm in the same kind of boat with you, and we got to nurse some injuries to get ready for the things that we love to do, which I think is an interesting kind of parallel to this conversation around kind of priorities. I think for me, a gateway into this was a conversation I had with Marco, one of your previous guests, a friend of ours, where he really challenged me to say, you want to talk about identity and where are you finding your identity, that sort of thing. That was certainly part of the question. But he just said, what are you doing other than ministry?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's in your life other than ministry? And at 23, 24, I didn't have an answer. That's all it was, because that's what was modeled to me. Ministry was life.
Yeah.
And like you were saying earlier, you're the suffering servant. And the idea of success was 70 hours a week, trying to be with people all the time, trying to think through this, that, and the other thing. And I'd never answered that question. And I didn't grow up in a household that modeled hobbies really, or stuff
Right.
outside. And we weren't in a financial position to really necessarily access those things all the time. And so that was a really foreign question to me. I was like, I don't know. I don't know what a hobby is. Oh, well, I'd realized that actually drinking alcohol had become a hobby, that I was drinking too much, and that I was kind of getting my way through 70-hour work weeks because I was consuming too much.
Yeah.
And so the invitation was, why don't you try on different stuff? And I didn't grow up in a household that hunted or was, it's funny enough, before ministry, my dad was a commercial salmon fisherman.
Really.
And because of our relationship and the tension that existed there and what he did for work, a lot of that stuff wasn't accessible in our relationship. We didn't get to do that. I'd heard stories, and we went fishing a couple times, but it wasn't like I got to do that day in, day out every weekend with him. And so I had grown up kind of not being outdoors in that kind of way. And I had a friend who invited me in, and it opened the whole world to me. And very quickly I realized, this might be something that might compete for that fire that I feel, for the desire in
Yeah.
ministry leadership, might compete for that. And it's turned out to be pretty true for me.
I think we're told, whether it be, expressed, that it's not okay to have that kind of passion, right, for other things. Like you mentioned alcohol. I'm a bourbon freak, right?
Mm-hmm.
And most people know that. I love
Mm-hmm.
bourbon.
Yeah.
You look in my office, and people would think that their pastor might be an alcoholic. And I don't drink too much bourbon too often, but I sure know it. I love to fish. Um, I mean, I love, and I like to fish alone, which I always felt a little bit guilty about because you're supposed to have someone on the boat with you so you can do ministry,
Right.
right?
Right.
No, I don't need anyone on the boat with me. I want to break brush. I want to be out in the middle. I want to be a mile deep into the uncharted, where if I died out there, no one could find me.
Right.
That's where I like to be. And that's become an amazing passion. And now I'm having to learn. And I did during COVID when we were shut down on Sundays, because we didn't try to do the whole online thing and appease everybody. We just said, hey, not doing it. I record a sermon on Thursday and we'll put it out there for people to watch. Sunday mornings, which I've never been able to do, I left the house at, 7 a.m. or earlier, and I would stay just as long as I would if I was in church till 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And that was my sanctuary. It was my respite.
Mm-hmm.
And then I all of a sudden, within a year, I didn't do it the next year. I could have
Mm-hmm.
done a different day.
Mm-hmm.
I could have made that priority. But I was thinking about a conversation I just having the other day at breakfast with my dad, and what you said about those conversations. I don't hardly remember a conversation in our house that wasn't ministry or church related, even to the point now where I'm a terrible conversationalist. I really am. Like when we go out to dinner with a couple or somebody, Cindy knows that she's got to carry the conversation because I'm really comfortable talking about ministry.
Right.
I'm not always comfortable and feel like I can bounce the ball back and forth talking about life,
Yeah.
passion. I can talk about bourbon fishing, but it's bourbon fishing and Jesus. That's about it.
That's not a bad
And I think
life.
it's not a bad life, but I feel like it's a weakness sometimes because I'm like, that's really kind of probably the guy probably thinks I'm pretty quite shallow because I can't talk about
I
anything
relate to that.
else.
There are times where certainly I find myself at a loss of like, how do I enter into this conversation? And I've got some friends of mine who are just masters of navigating conversation and can connect, even though they have nothing in common with the person they're talking to. They make that person feel like they are seen, known, and their best friend. And I'm like, I do not possess that skill. And it's rooted in, and maybe you and I share this a little bit too. Do I really care about this conversation?
Well, I have to ask that question. That is a fair
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. Is this really just kind of a waste of my time? Which is the question I'm asking most of the
Now,
time.
Cindy, she really does. I tell people, like last weekend, we were in Salt Lake and we met my oldest son's um, in-laws to be here in a few weeks. And we actually have quite a bit in common. We met them for the very first time, have quite a bit in common. And I tell people jokingly, I say it a lot, like, hey, listen, we're not actually interrogating you, but Cindy really likes to know people. And
Mm-hmm.
so for her, that's legit. For me, I would honestly say that it's a bit contrived. It is a bit contrived when I have to find something to talk about with people.
Yeah. Yeah. I relate to that. And small talk is one of those things. I actually have a good friend of mine who just says, I don't like small talk. I don't do small talk, and says that at the front of kind of conversations and just shuts it down, which I appreciate the honesty around that. I don't think the positions we hold lend itself to be able to do that. But there's times where I wish I could say, yeah, I don't really like small talk. And I wish I could just shut it down. But
Well,
it's a skill.
I wish I was just better at asking questions because then you don't really have to converse,
Mm-hmm.
and that's not a skill that I have. Number one, because I like to hear myself talk. I really do enjoy the sound of my own voice and I like an audience. And which may take us all the way back to this sense of false security.
Mm.
Um, I don't know if that's true. Oh, that's not true. I actually think it's true of most pastors. We kind of like having all the answers and being the answer person, which
Well,
goes back
I
to
hesitate to use this word because it's a heavy word, but there's got to be a light dose of narcissism for most ministry leaders, right? Like we have to be willing to believe in ourselves enough to get in front of people and share our perspective on a creator God. We have to be able to give them life advice. Like there's got to be at least, and maybe it's a healthy dose. It's a necessary dose that certainly can go to unhealthy places as we see all the time. But I mean, am I using a correct term there, or would you say there's another kind of concept that you would
Well,
insert there?
it's not a phrase that I've thrown out, but I think I'm going to go with, I think that's accurate. But I think we're talking about was how do we know to put on the brakes and find the balance in that? I do think, well, first of all, I think people want to know that their ministry leader, their pastor, their spiritual director is secure, confident in who they are, because it's pretty hard to take advice from somebody who, seems like they don't know anything about their own life and anything about what they're talking about. So I think it's important on both sides. I think it's important for me to feel confident in what I'm knowing and what I'm doing, that I'm not talking out of complete ignorance. And I think it's important, like yesterday morning, giving an Easter sermon, that I can speak with some level of authority as opposed to just fumbling my way through it. Because pretty soon no one's listening anymore because, no one wants to follow that. There's some level of leadership until leadership then becomes my identity as well. And so I guess that's my struggle. It's really interesting. It's just, we're asking questions that it's funny to be launching this conversation about authenticity and realizing that the only way to talk about authenticity is to talk about your inauthenticity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then admitting the fact that you've got some, or a lot, or a
Yep.
decent dose anyway. And I do.
Yep. Yeah.
But
Same.
I think narcissism is fine. I think you cross the line when you're Donald Trump. That's crossing the line. And
I would think that the line's well before that.
well before that. But no, you talk about examples of that, because at some point that's not attractive either,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's not attractive, somebody who's just full of themselves and loves themselves more than you feel like they love you.
I think I'd argue that I think it's attractive to some people, but it's
Okay.
not healthy. That's not based
No.
in like a healthy relationship.
Okay. No, that's
I mean,
true, but it's not a
I
help.
mean, you want to keep walking down the Trump path. Look at all the people who adore him for how bombastic he is.
Yeah.
He's the difference maker. He's not like anyone else. He breaks the mold. I would argue, is that not some kind of codependent relationship though? Because that person's so bombastic, they're saying things that you could never say for yourself. And so it invites, well, this person will do this for me. Or maybe they're the tip of the spear and then I can say something, right? But an example like a Donald Trump, I think is so, it's such an extreme example that I don't experience that in my everyday relationships, but I
No, I don't.
experience
I know
some balance
other
of it
experience like that, right?
where I have people in my life who I think at times look at me to be the person who's going to kind of open the conversation or who's
Right.
going to create the space for this to happen. And they never would have done it themselves. And the counterintuitive kind of part of that, this is another aspect of therapy. We're just giving the recap of what therapy has been like for the last 3 years. It sounds like, is exploring how do we invite people into understanding their own healthy expression and understanding of self, which includes those gaps.
Well, I think that would be, and I'm always trying to bring this back just a little bit to, and we are the whole time, but about our pastoral roles. Our congregations, the church is filled with the world. Okay, we'll just make it the world. The world is filled with insecure people. We all
Mm-hmm.
are. We're
Mm-hmm.
conditioned, right? From the moment we come out, we become conditioned of you're rewarded for certain behaviors and you're disciplined or punished for other behaviors, and we learn which behaviors get us a cookie.
Mm.
And so that immediately begins to erode our sense of self, confidence, esteem, image, and we begin to fill that with other people who can fill in the gap, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You all right? They
Yep.
fill in that gap for us, so we're riding their coattails of what looks like security, which also just might be narcissism.
Hmm.
And that can really build a church. It can build a ministry. It can build a reputation. And that looks like success. And so once again, we go back to, how do I fit in? How do I hang with this group? I've got to kind of do the same thing. I got to build a tribe of followers who think I walk on water. But sometimes, really, those leaders, I wonder, I could be wrong on this, I'm not even sure they have a point on this, is that those leaders perhaps aren't putting on a facade. They're just really being 100% honest, authentic, vulnerable, transparent, and that's attractive too. We're the ones that put them on a pedestal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So can get out of hand.
To me, that brings up the question around what are we seeing as success? What do we describe as success? I agree with you.
Yeah.
There's a prevailing model of what success can and look like. I feel like in a lot of my circles, there's been permission for a redefinition around that. I'd be interested to hear from you if you feel like there are healthier conversations happening with the people in your circles around what does ministry success look like. And I would say I've been on a journey, am on a journey from butts and seats, fill the room, into a healthier understanding of whole self, identity in Christ, first and foremost, and creating really that kind of concept that we read throughout, especially Paul's writings, of the concept of oikos. We are the extended family. That seems to be more the direction of this is what success looks like. Are we finding people who are finding their identity and healthy identity and are being released into who they've been created to be in every sphere of their life? And are we seeing that people are being faithful in their everyday circles to that sort of thing, as opposed to, we just got to get people to show up. We need an annual budget that looks like this. I need to have certain, book deals or platforms, and I don't want to disparage that there was a time and a place where that was defined as success. I think I entered into that world on the tail end of that being the predominant model. And maybe that's a difference between your life stage and my life stage, is that was handed down to you as the predominant model. I'm grateful that there was an alternative, that wasn't the only way to see success specifically. But
Yeah, I think I
I'd
came.
be
I think
interested
I
to know if
came
you
into
have
ministry.
other conversations in that way.
Well, I think I came into ministry at the time of the pinnacle of that definition of success. You know, how many people can you pack into a room or to a stadium or to an event? And so COVID exacerbated or removed that, and exacerbated just removed that from us, which left a lot of people maybe floundering. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's a fair word for me. I'm floundering because all of a sudden what I defined, or what was defined for me, how I was conditioned to view ministry, which was not always, completely fulfilling, was still met a need in my flesh. And so now I've got to redefine not only who I am, but what success looks like, and who I am and what I'm trying to do and what I'm trying to accomplish. And so if I don't have 10,000 listeners or 5,000 subscribers or whatever, and I'm only hitting a handful of people, is that worth it? So in my own journey, especially in the last 3 years with COVID and health crisis and all kinds of things, I'll throw the word out there that people will cringe at. And that's, I do think that we are finding another level of enlightenment of what is healthy, translating that into biblical concepts of what success looks like in church, in ministry. I would agree that I'm hearing the same conversations, although my circles, I feel like sometimes I'm actually leading that conversation. Then only to realize that maybe because I run with too small of a circle of people where that conversation is going on all over the place. If you think you're the one talking about things, then you really got your head buried in the sand. And you might just be catching up. No different than our conversation a couple years ago on prayer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm questioning all these elements of prayer and how I communicate with God and what that means, only to find that, Wes has been experiencing this longer than I have. So, yeah, I do think some of us, and I really think that of your season in life, are probably ahead of me and those who may be more contemporarily my age are seeing, because we're still trying to swallow that pill
Mm-hmm.
without feeling like we're wrong. We've been wrong the entire time, which I appreciate you saying, that we're not trying to indict or disparage people, because there was a need for that.
Hmm.
I mean, we have a friend that makes his, living his ministry by packing stadiums. I don't find as much value in that anymore. And I'm not saying it's not valuable, but I don't hold that as high esteem anymore, which is really hard when I have conversations with him, because
Well,
it's become a big part of who he is,
and
and
how
that's fine.
and how can I disparage when I was one of the people who was in one of those packed stadiums?
Correct.
It's a part. It's a
Right.
part of my faith journey and faith story. It's foundational to my understanding at that time and season of figuring out what it means to follow Jesus. And so I can't throw it all out, even though I may have ideological and theological challenges and questions for it. It's not all bad, and I wouldn't describe it as evil.
No.
And so I'm not going to just throw it out and say it can't be used. It's not useful anymore. But I would say, are we open to the conversation, and is our friend open to a conversation of, is that the best use of our time, energy, resources, and does it have the greatest amount of impact?
Right. When I have to look at everything I do running a business and a nonprofit as or ROI.
Yep.
Let's talk about what's most effective. If I put all this energy into this one big event to yield only this small percentage, was that worth it, when we can statistically, culturally, societally say today that this particular generation we're trying to minister to, which is not necessarily a age demographic, right? Learn different, want different, receive differently. But once again, it goes back to, but I get a lot of, this is not all flesh. This is just part of our psyche. I get a lot of strokes. I get a lot of affirmation here. And then who am I?
Mm-hmm.
So that's having to ask people to jettison a lot of cargo in
Totally.
order to embrace something new, which is why we can't throw rocks at. I said this in the last podcast too. I said sometimes what I'm trying to talk about authenticity is trying to get people to buy preparation H for hemorrhoids they don't realize they have, right? Because you don't want to admit that. You just don't want to admit and stand up and go, I have an itch, right?
Right.
I need some relief. I would just rather live with the discomfort as opposed to admit it. And there's nothing wrong with it. It comes with the pressure of pooping, right? And
Right.
that's what we're doing. We're working through something brand new to birth something, right?
Wow.
And
You might be the only ministry podcast I know, apart from Youth Ministry on Tap, that's talking about poop in your episode. So,
poop and hemorrhoids,
oh boy. And now you got
you
it
know,
in 2 episodes, so you just might start trending.
I hope so. Hashtag authentic hemorrhoid, something like that. And that could be a thing.
It's really interesting. I've been wrestling for probably the last 2 years with even the concept of ROI as language within ministry. Because I agree, it's a thing. It's something that is helpful to talk about. It's something that I have promoted. And I think about constantly.
Yeah, but we stole a business term, right?
Yeah. And if there's anything that has become clear, I don't have it all figured out. If there's anything that has become clear in the exploration and reconsideration of that terminology, it is, boy, there is a difference between kingdom, Bible, kingdom of God, economy and what we see in modern 20th, 21st century American Christianity. And
Well, I was going to say because we're Western
yeah,
in our mindset, we're consumeristic in our mindset. It's really hard to divorce that.
and ROI is a linear concept,
It is, yeah.
very little in kingdom economy is linear.
Yeah, it's like I was thinking earlier. There's a reason there is the church goes through Reformation,
Mm-hmm.
and that doesn't mean that what happened for the last 500 years was bad, or last 50 years was bad. And like we've said this twice now, but I never want to be indicting of things that God uses any foolish thing that we come up with. We just like to take credit for it. So whether we're right or wrong in our strategies and our principles, it's useful to the kingdom. Sometimes more useful than another, but I don't think we can throw any of it out because, once again, that'd be no different than thinking that yesterday I had an amazing sermon and somebody heard nothing that I said, but the Holy Spirit sure did a lot of work. If your mind is open to change, your mind will be changed. But if your mind's not open to change, nothing I can say will ever change your mind. That's
Well,
just pure science.
that's to me where the language we were using earlier about being a slave to Christ. Talk about slavery in that kind of concept of bondage. Is there freedom? Preparing a sermon every week where you're unsure if anyone's going to have any life change from it, but you do it anyway out of devotion and relationship with Jesus. That to me is applicable, because the point isn't necessarily, am I going to get people to respond? Because that's not really my job. But I
Right.
think many of us have made it our job. But
Well,
it's moving away from the primary power of the Holy Spirit and inviting the Holy Spirit into space to do the work, that we are a tool. For me, it's about order of operations and priority. It's not about the either or. Yes, absolutely. I have been given a season, a personality, a set of gifts and tools in order to do those things. But why did I do them? It's not necessarily for my own notoriety, or at least I should be aware of trying to lessen my notoriety and instead say, how do I create space for the Holy Spirit to do the work within the church?
I've got a pastor on our church staff that he is the most laid back, melancholy personality. Funny as heck. Amazing dry humor. I love to hear him teach. Other people can't stand it because I'm not. I'm pretty demonstrative and in your face and boisterous and in my teaching style. And I've been to the same church for 27 years. And so we begin to break him into the pulpit, and people are like, I don't know that I like to hear him speak. I don't know that I like to hear him speak. And my response has always been, so you're telling me you can only learn one way. The truth is, you might like my style, but I'm still not the teacher. I'm still not the teacher. That sounds a little over spiritual, but we like to feel as though that we have it figured out. We know how to do it. We're making all the difference, which again goes back to me like trying to figure out who I am and what I'm trying to do and what I'm all about, and not being balanced because I have to be that good. I've got to take a new class and study something new and learn new theology and learn a new oration style or whatever, so that I never get stale. When there are days, multiple days in a year, I wonder what people would think if I just got up in the pulpit and said, open up your Bible or your phone, and we're just going to read Matthew chapter 5 today, and then I'm going to get down off the stage. You're dismissed. Have a good week. And actually find that people might have grown more, learned more, discovered more when I let my ego get out of the way of thinking that I needed to do it. That's an extreme, but I think that kind of relates to what we're talking about.
When I was young in ministry leadership, I loved the story that Rob Bell told about how he just got up every week and preached the same sermon. I think for a year he did that. And I think it took quite while for a lot of people to catch on that it was the same sermon every
Oh
week,
yeah.
because he's a gifted communicator and certainly can draw a crowd in and that sort of thing. But for him, it was a bit of a social experiment of how do I use my time wisely, and we're creatures of our time, so we're shaped by all of these educational theories, learning theories, that sort of thing. Will people actually catch on and care? Or, for me, is it theological that if we get this thing right? I think it was also a Sermon on the Mount type sermon where he just said, we just got to nail this. We got to get this right. This is foundational to all of these other pieces of understanding how we follow Jesus. And that's, to me, not the way that we've been taught to, build our congregations and build discipleship and that sort of thing.
If I remember the story that I think you're telling correctly, he spoke 22 weeks on the Sermon on the Mount. 22 weeks. There's not, you look at that and think, what do I possibly teach 22 weeks in a row on the Sermon on the Mount? Doesn't it speak for itself? But again, there's so much to say in there. You could literally get up and read it and get yourself. So going back full circle to what we're trying to say.
Yeah.
I'm learning to get myself out of the way. But to do that, I've got to figure out what I believe about myself and how much of that is authentically me and how much of that is artificially created to get you to think what I want you to think. I'm still trying to figure that out. I really still am trying to figure that out. And I know I'm not the only person on this conversation or person listening to this conversation is doing that, as long as we're open and honest enough to admit it.
I think I would argue we can't get out of the way. But it's being aware of what is our role in the process. What do we bring to the table? Because we're in it. We're part of the translation. We're part of the interpretation. We're part of the communication. So I'm not necessarily getting out of the way, but it's being aware of the strengths and flaws that I bring to that process. And I can't fill 100% of that occupancy of that role. I've got to leave room for the Holy Spirit to play a role in that as well. And that starts with what you're describing. I have to understand myself and what I'm bringing to the table here and recognize the potential strengths and limitations of what I bring into that process. I think that's a very healthy, holistic way of thinking about how we step into our roles as teachers and shepherds and pastors of whatever group we've been put over. It's not so much I got to get out of the way, because God's using us intentionally as a tool. He created us with a calling and a gift set to do those things. But when we think unhindered that we are the gift as opposed to a gifted one that God wants to use, that's where I think we start to get things out of whack.
I'm telling you what, as always, you challenge me in a positive way. I'm hoping there's enough conversation taking place, even if it's just in people's own heart, whether they can articulate it or not with somebody else in leadership or a colleague or even in their spouse, that there's potentially, and I actually don't think that potentially, I was going to say potentially a paradigm shift taking place. God is in control. He brings glory to himself. He's got a plan. He's got a structure. He's got a strategy. And it's going to change if we're attuned to listening to it. I love the fact that we can have the conversation. I'm hoping that our honest dialogue opens up the chance for other people to at least ponder the possibilities of something new. Even if it's painful to, like hemorrhoids, push it out, right? Even if it's itchy and discomforting. And
I appreciate that I'm forever going to be known as the one who talked with you about hemorrhoids as a metaphor for our role as pastors.
At least you're memorable. So, but somebody's going to probably go, I can't believe you said that. You ought to hear some of the other stuff I say. So,
yeah.
Hey, man, I get to see you in like 3 weeks. 4 weeks. 4 weeks.
Yep.
I get to see you in 4 weeks face to face, where we'll continue this and other conversations. But it's your Monday. I hope you find time to do something else with your kids and your wife today.
I'm on pickup duty today, so first thing I'll do is to be the taxi to get them home.
Good. That's a good priority. So, hey, thanks for the honest chat, as always.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me to be a part of it, and I can't wait for the next one.
Yeah, there will be one. Take care, Wes.
All right.
Thanks.
See you, Tim.